Noah McCourt, who joins me now live from Minneapolis. He's a human rights activist. Noah, we really appreciate you being with us. I want to talk about that investigation that is going into the Minneapolis Police Department right now. Not only the governor, but also the state's human rights commissioner. They're hoping to reach an agreement with the city to come up with short-term solutions and long-term solutions to this problem. In the short term, they want to see specific things that are being used to address the police department's history, the history of racial discrimination. What do you think those short-term solutions should be?
I think many of those short-term solutions are solutions that the community has not necessarily been invited to the table on. We have a lot of really great organizations here in the Twin Cities that are really working to affect change in the way that law enforcement responds to the community that they represent. Some of the short-term changes that we've proposed include law enforcement liability insurance. We have a lot of entities and professions that they have to insure themselves, whether that's a business owner or a dentist or a medical professional. Many of them have liability insurance that they, that once they reach a certain point, they aren't able to operate in that profession anymore. And we feel that law enforcement at this point in Minnesota, where there is extensive examples of disparities, extensive examples of misuse, that we are really looking to see them held accountable. And unfortunately, the governor and the attorney general have not reached out to myself or any of the other activists who have been involved in many of the protests here in the Twin Cities. So many of the changes that we have proposed may or may not come to light.
Well, this is the thing. Everybody is out protesting. We know that it's not just about the death of George Floyd. This is about discrimination against African Americans in all parts of our institutional systems and just life in general. So when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and if you could also touch on the other thing that's happening today is Blackout Tuesday. There's several different movements going on. That's a good thing, but how do you focus the message and exact meaningful change so it's not just a widespread condemnation of racism? You're actually pushing government officials and local officials to do something about it.
The community has really responded in a very strong way here, and you're absolutely right. This is not about justice for George Floyd as much as it is about systemic change. The justice does not come with a prosecution. It's not going to come with even the conviction. Justice is really going to come when we have widespread systemic changes that prevent this kind of thing from happening tomorrow. And so I would say there are a lot of movements here, and a lot of these movements are very intersectional, such as my own. Having high-functioning autism, I continue to be very concerned with the concerning ratios that 54% of individuals who are killed by police annually are people with disabilities. And many of those are people of color. And so we've been having a lot of conversations with members of the state legislature and with members of the governor's office and the AG's office about really affecting policy change here that is not just momentary, but that really lasts into the future.
Noah, we appreciate you sharing that aspect of this as well. That's certainly an important issue that we haven't highlighted on our network yet. But I want to talk about what this all means for the larger movement, which is you see these protests gaining momentum. You see the President of the United States trying to get people to go home and use the military to do it. When people are being tear gassed off the streets of their cities, many of them peacefully demonstrating, how do you keep the movement and the momentum from dying down?
Well, this is not the America I know. The America I know really values protest as a form of the freedom of expression, which is very much alive in our, in our Constitution. I would say that the best way that we keep it going is we continue to be visible. Every day, more and more people turn out to seek justice for George Floyd. And as a result of seeking justice for George Floyd, we are really starting to see the legislature and even the governor has really shifted the narrative about how do we affect change here in Minnesota? How do we have a much stronger response to systemic racism here in Minnesota? And one of the more concerning things that I have seen activists really come together here in Minnesota, including the Council on American and Islamic Relations and the Communities United Against Police Brutality, and several of our members in the Racial Justice Network, is we have really been seeking to reclaim the narrative. As you're aware, we have a narrative that we have outside agitators and people coming into the state to wreak havoc. But what that really does is it dismisses the idea that we have a lot of anger in this community because we have a lot of homegrown racists right here in the state of Minnesota. And that systemic racism needs to be addressed right here in the state of Minnesota. The other thing that on the other side of the aisle, we have the governor and others who are really attempting to frame it again as outside agitators and really dismissing again that the community is angry and that we need to get something out of this event. We as a state need to learn and we need to grow and we need to make some movement towards addressing systemic racism.
Let's open it up for a second, Noah, to the national picture. There's a number of states that are going to be holding primaries. We know that actually it looks like Joe Biden has just taken the Democratic primary. It's very possible that he could get enough delegates that he needs in these state primaries to go from the presumptive nominee to the party's nominee. Joe Biden has hit out at the president, saying he's not addressing the issue. He's only making it worse. But he's also saying that he's promising that if elected, he's going to heal the country's racial wounds. In Minneapolis there, we heard George Floyd's brother say, go out and vote. How do we look at our country's candidates for president or running mates? And I mean, how does that work in terms of going out and voting and that aspect of change when it comes to what's happening in the country?
You know, as a former candidate for political office, I am really proud to say that people need to vote their conscience. You know, whether you're DFL or whether or not you're a Republican, there are a lot of concerns with both sides of the aisle in terms of racial equity and just overall equity in general. You know, we have one side of the aisle saying that they are going to do nothing for racial equity, and we have the other side of the aisle saying that we're going to offer you the bare minimum and we're going to offer you nothing. And as we've seen with Joe Biden and his comments about how, yes, the Black community should just vote for us anyways. And I'm here to stand here today and say we're not voting for him anyways, unless there is some real systemic changes that happen at both the federal and state level that bring about changes in racial equity and that offer people solutions here in the state of Minnesota and places to go when they are targeted by law enforcement.
Noah McCourt, we really appreciate your thoughts that are just so well articulated in a time where the rest of the world is looking at America right now and they don't understand what is going on. Noah McCourt, live from Minneapolis. Thank you.